Welcome back to the Pursuit of Progress, where we explore real estate, self improvement, and how to get better every single day. I'm Ben, and as always, I'm joined by my co host, Adam. Today, we're diving into a trap that a lot of buyers and sellers fall into, trying to time the market. We're going to show you the actual cost of waiting, how to think like a long term investor, and why the people who make moves with clarity and strategy tend to win, while others are still sitting on the sidelines.
And guys, definitely stick around because we're breaking down the psychology of waiting, the math behind lost opportunities, and even a few personal stories where timing the market did not go as planned.
Yeah, Adam, welcome back to another episode. Great to see you.
You too, buddy. How's things, man? I know you were up in Vail this past week, enjoying a little mountain time with the fam. How'd that go?
It went awesome. One of the things that we enjoyed in Vale is walking through Vale Village and trying to guess or estimate the price of every home that we saw. And we're talking about real estate and just pretty incredible, $25 million properties, $20 million properties. It is a different world up there. Let's just say that.
Yeah, when I lived in Aspen, I always thought it was funny how the average usage of these homes in Aspen, I know there was a period of time where the average home was lived in 1 week out of the year. So you think
Yeah.
about these 50 million, $60 million homes, and literally they're just vacant, 50 weeks out of the year, maybe a week at Christmas and a week around 4th of July or something like that. Pretty insane.
I know it's pretty incredible to think about just the amount of resources that are going into something to only utilize that 1 or 2 weeks a year. One thing that I always notice about some of these mountain properties is that the landscaping is always impeccable. And like the way that I determine that is you have a $20 million home, the landscape is just peanuts. It doesn't matter, it doesn't mean anything. And that's why all of these homes are just meticulously manicured and just look incredible. The actual home, but then the actual landscaping too.
Yep, we can dream one day, my friend, one day.
Yeah, that is right.
Well, today's episode is going to be all about the real cost of waiting. And we wanted to do this episode today because this is something that's coming up a lot in both of our circles, Ben as a lender and myself as a realtor. Just with the higher interest rates, just a lot of people kind of staying on the sidelines, a little bit of uncertainty, a little bit of, just hesitance to get into the market and buy something. So we're just going to talk to you guys today about why sometimes trying to time the market can actually backfire, and just understanding a little bit of perspective on the real cost of waiting. So excited to kind of definitely dive into this one with you guys. But Ben, before we do, I wanted to share a quick quote. I finished a book earlier this year. It's by Morgan Housel, and it's called The Psychology of Money. I'm not sure if you've read that one yet or not. I have a mentor of mine that recommended it last year, so I finally got around to it. And it just does a very good job kind of simplifying money behavior, spending, just your entire just perspective on money. And the quote from the book that I really liked was this: doing well with money has a little to do with how smart you are and a lot to do with how you behave. Waiting to feel certain is a behavior rooted in fear, not data. Let me say that last part again. Waiting to feel certain is a behavior rooted in fear, not data. Thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, that's great. I haven't heard that one before, so that's interesting. I think it's very relevant. It's the difference between that scarcity mindset and the abundance mindset. One thing that I can say in regards to that, when you're a little bit more not as experienced and maybe you haven't, it could be stocks, bonds, it could be real estate investing. When you haven't done something before, there can be a little bit more fear because you think you need to time things just perfect. But you're absolutely right that a lot of times that's a huge mistake. And that really brings us to our first kind of segment or topic today, which is the myth of perfect timing. People start making mistakes when everyone thinks they'll know when the time is right. And, one of my favorite quotes from Warren Buffett is, stop trying to time the market. It's time in the market, not trying to time the market. So as long as you have a long-term outlook and whatever it is you're doing, so let's use real estate, for example. If you're looking to purchase a home, and this is what I always say, if you see yourself as a homeowner 20 years from now, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, then right now is the best time to buy, because you want to start, you want to get in the market so you can spend as long in the market as possible, because that's where the gains come from. It's time in the market, not trying to time the market. Here's a truth, and I've learned this from personal experience. Even the pros can't time the market with precision. When you look at the stock market performance, 95% of portfolio managers cannot even beat the S&P 500.
Hmm.
And these are professionals. These are the best on Wall Street. 95% of them can't even beat uh, the S&P 500. What that means is that even the pros can't time the market. Uh, it's flawed thinking. And another thing that we're seeing right now is the market can change fast. It can change faster than your emotions, faster than your decision making process. Um, and what I think about is how quickly interest rates came up over that, really 12-month period from 2021 into 2022. You had those people. I always love sharing this story because it just illustrates how big of a mistake this was. But I had a buyer that I was working with at the time, and the appraisal came in $2,000 less than what the home sales price was from the contract. And instead of coming into closing with $2,000 more, this is back in 2020, he decided to walk away from the property because it was going to take a little bit out of his budget. Well, and he just continued to rent. Well, that same property now today is worth $200,000 more than what it was just 4 or 5 years ago. So that mistake right there cost him literally $198,000.
And I would argue that even more so because he paid, let's just say, $2,000 a month in rent for those 2 or 3 years if he didn't end up buying something else. There's a lot of factors to consider there.
Yeah, and also the financing terms. The financing terms
Yeah.
at the time were also near historic lows. So just the opportunity cost that this individual walked away from was unreal.
And just before moving on, one other quote that I like to use, really similar to the Warren Buffett one that Ben shared with you guys, one that I think is really easy to remember, that I say quite often is, don't wait to buy real estate, buy real estate and wait. So
Yeah.
just another play on words there, an easy one for you guys to remember that definitely has a lot of merit to it. Let's talk down with the second segment. So again, we've got 5 segments prepared for you guys today just to talk through and all about the real cost of waiting. So Ben just shared that first one, the myth of perfect timing. The second one is just the hidden costs of waiting, and that kind of is a good lead-in segment to what Ben was just talking about with a few of these items. The first one is that missed equity growth. So $200,000 of appreciation in the 3-4 years since Ben's example that he shared. That's a lot of equity growth in a city like Denver that is experiencing, still a pretty significant amount of appreciation year over year for the most part. Most areas in Denver are still, seeing some level of appreciation. That's just an even more of a reason to just understand that it's important to get in and still make a smart decision with whatever home you're buying, but just making sure that, you're letting time be in your favor instead of just waiting and kind of putting it off for another couple years. There's not just the equity though. There's also tax deductions, rent payments that you're spending instead of putting it towards your equity of your home. Sometimes, oftentimes, when people are waiting, they start to get decision fatigue, also known as analysis paralysis. And because of that, they just take no action at all. People that are just kind of on the fence, on the sidelines, they just, they're 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and they never end up buying. They just, they have that fear that kind of holds them back from taking action. And, that's something that is very understandable. A lot of people deal with that. I can relate to that to some level, but it's just a matter of just, having the confidence and making the right decision and letting time be on your side.
Yeah, it's like when you wait, you get so obsessed about trying to just time things perfectly. And 3 years go by, 5 years go by, and then all of a sudden you see that interest rates have gone up, property values have gone up tremendously. And then in hindsight, you look back and you just realize, how much of a mistake that was. And so, for those buyers that were like willing and able, or maybe able but not willing, 3 or 4 years ago, and they didn't do anything, and now they're, if they buy now, their mortgage payment is going to be double or triple. what it could have been. Now, depending on what their goals are, that could still be the right move today. But if you miss that window and you were able to buy in 2020 or 2021, I mean, it's a big missed opportunity.
Yeah, those super low interest rates really didn't do anybody any favors other than the people that locked those in. But it really did a disservice, I think, to the overall real estate industry because people just finally, I think, are starting to realize that that was not normal and that's not going to happen again. Hopefully, people's expectations by now have, they've come to the realization that the 2.5% interest rates, that's not coming back anytime soon, if ever. And the norm is actually going to be probably in that 5 to 6 to 7% range, kind of similar to where we're at today.
Yeah, and that really brings us to our next segment, segment C, which is interest rate confusion. And kind of along the same lines, it's when it's kind of that fear of missing out is how I would describe it. When you look back and maybe your best friend bought 3 or 4 years ago, and they have an interest rate of in the threes, and then you're looking at what your interest rate is. It's tough to think that there's others out there that have a much more affordable mortgage payment, and you're going to have to pay twice as much monthly payment because interest rates are higher for a home that's half as nice is your friend that bought 3 or 4 years ago. So, the biggest thing is understanding interest rate movement. I just bought Ray Dalio's new book that comes out. It actually just got delivered today. How countries go broke, and what he talks about is the short-term debt cycle and then the long-term debt cycle. They're both very, very important. And what we're seeing over the last 12 months is more of a short-term interest rate movement. So a short-term cycle where interest rates have really hovered from 6.5 to 7.5%. But then what is that long-term trend going to be? And as more of this economic data comes out, as President Trump gets into his agenda a little bit more, we'll start to get a better feel. Is that long-term debt cycle, long-term interest rate cycle, is that going to come back down? Or is it going to be kind of where we've been? Small rate changes can have big consequences as far as your payment, especially if your loan amount is larger. So for folks that are here in Denver, if you have a $700,000 loan, an eighth of a point in interest rate is going to matter a lot more than someone that's in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with $100,000 loan. So that's also a very big one.
Mhm.
But even with that, though, even if you finance something, let's just say that you put 5% down, and this is always the analogy that I use, going back to when I bought my first home. This was back in 2010. I bought my first home in Phoenix, Arizona. At the time, I could only scramble up 3.5% for my down payment, and my mom even helped me with some of that. And I bought this home for $130,000 in Phoenix, Arizona. So I had around like $3,000 of my own money invested. And this is just to kind of give an example of how leverage works compared to price appreciation. So even though I financed almost the entire purchase price, well, that home appreciated over the next 5 years. I was able to sell it for 200,000. So that little $3,000 investment that I made in 2010, I walked away with over $70,000 in proceeds in 2015. I then rolled that $70,000 in proceeds into my Golden property in Metro Denver, and I used that for my down payment. So that was exclusively used for my down payment. The proceeds from the sale of the Arizona home moved to Colorado. Used that 70,000 to then buy the Colorado property. And now, over the last 10 years, that Colorado property has doubled. So that $3,000 investment from 2010 is now literally worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Just 15 short years later, and that right there is always the story I love telling, because that right there is the power of real estate. When I was 26 years old, I bought my first house with $3,000 out of pocket. That $3,000 is now literally worth like 600,000 plus.
That's awesome. Really inspiring. And I think it's also important to understand that you're not going to have a home run every time. So, you might, buy a home that maybe isn't at the best possible price or, understand that it's a game, and the more you play, the more you
Yeah.
pay, the better you're going to get at this. and there's only so much you can do from the sidelines. It really does take action getting into the market to really, I think, fine tune some of these skills that need to be developed over time through experience. And you're not going to have that experience unless you play the game. So, interest rates being a common thing that we talk about as far as keeping people out of playing the game, I think is important just to realize that, getting in and playing the game, getting into it is a really important thing for a lot of people. And getting over that mindset shift or that concern is a big one.
Yeah, and that's what I always say too, where, do interest rates matter? Well, of course they do, because they determine your finance charge, your principal and interest payments, how much you pay in interest over the course of the loan. So yes, they matter, but exactly what you said, you should be looking at it more from a perspective of affordability and budgeting. Can you
Hmm.
afford this? Does it fit within your budget? And if it does, and if you can afford it, and if you look at yourself and you believe that you're going to be a homeowner 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, once you get over that hurdle of homeownership, you don't ever want to go back to renting. So once you've crossed that mountain and you've made it over and you're now a homeowner, you want to stay a homeowner, because you're always going to be like that $3,000 that I invested in 2010. Even if I sell this place in gold and go buy something else, I will still be working with that initial $3,000 investment back from 2010. That's just how it works. So any proceeds, any gains that I get are because of that investment all the way back from 15 years ago. And then to your last point, when I bought my first home, it was an FHA loan. So there was mortgage insurance. And at the time, the mortgage insurance premiums are higher than what they were today. I could have waited to try and save up, because that's a little bit of a misconception. Sometimes mortgage insurance gets such a bad rap and people look at it as toxic, and I'm not going to pay mortgage insurance. And was there a cost with that? Yeah. It was probably around $100 a month. But, big picture, what you're saying, I was still able to get into that home. That FHA loan was a tool and a resource for me to facilitate becoming a homeowner, and then being able to play the game of real estate, where I then, rolled that over and started to build my real estate portfolio.
Hmm. It's great, man. Definitely an inspiring story, buddy. Let's talk now about the fourth of the five. The number four one is going to be about inventory and just these opportunity windows. So, inventory, obviously, it fluctuates. Right now in Denver, we have a lot more homes on the market than we do buyers. So, it's a really good opportunity for buyers at the moment, but understanding that you may miss out on the right house waiting for that perfect market. So, there's this phrase that I know a lot of people in my field of work, been in my field of work, that don't really like this saying, but it's, you marry the house, you date the rate. What's your feeling on that, Ben? Do you like that term, or do you think that's kind of cheesy?
I know that phrase has gotten a lot of negative pushback,
Mhm.
because for a couple different reasons. Number one, we don't know what's going to happen with interest rates, but I like the kind of the message. I think it needs to be used in a responsible way, and I don't know if I would phrase it exactly like that, but I would phrase it more like what you said. To win at the game of real estate, you have to get in the game, and if you're not in the game, it's going to be impossible to win. And that's why I always ask, customers that I'm working with, what are your long-term plans? Are you gonna, how long are you planning on being in this home? Do you envision yourself being a homeowner for the rest of your life? Where do you see yourself 10 years from now, 20 years from now? I think once those questions are answered, it helps, you get some clarity as far as the present. So that'll help kind of clear things up for what is the correct decision right now.
What I love about real estate in comparison to other types of investing, let's just use stocks as an example. With stocks, you buy the stock and it's totally out of your control. You're just hoping that, that company does well and the stock appreciates and, goes up in value. Whereas with real estate, you have so many other factors that are a lot more in your control. It's more of a tangible investment. First off, you can actually enjoy it and use it, but also you have all these other strategies to kind of shore your bet a little bit stronger, make it an even safer or more strong investment. And one of these examples would also just be the ability to have value add, to be able to put sweat equity into the home, being able to, literally work on the house and improve it. And by
Yeah.
doing so, increase the value. You have the ability, if you're motivated and hardworking, to, almost create it where it's a no potential loss out there. I mean, if you really,
Yeah.
as long as you do a somewhat of a smart buy, you're not going to lose your butt like you could with more risky investments, like with certain types of stocks and stuff like that. I just love how you have these other ways to build up the value of your investment.
One thing I did earlier this spring is I redid my deck, my front deck. And number one, like you're saying, I get to enjoy that from a personal living. That's my place of peace when I'm at this house here in Golden. We have a fire pit out there. I'll do a lot of my morning reading. It's really, really beautiful in the summer. And I love spending time out there. It's kind of an outdoor living space for me and my family. So number one, we get to enjoy it, but then I also know that by me improving the deck, I'm also adding value to the home. So is there a cost to do that? Yes, of course there is. But I also know that I'm improving the value of my property and my collateral. And when your value goes up, you have the ability to kind of along the same lines that you were just mentioning, just how dynamic real estate is. And this is one of the things I love to do is it just gives you the option to re-leverage it or attach a line of credit to the property to where you can use that to go buy other real estate. And it's a way to turn a fixed asset into a liquid asset. So you just have so many different options.
Well, let's wrap it up with the fifth one, Ben. The fifth one is just the emotional cost of inaction.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, think about like, Jeff, I read Jeff Bezos's biography earlier this year, and he talked about where stress comes from most of the time. Where most stress comes from, it comes from a place of knowing that you should be doing something, but you're not actually taking the action and doing it. And I get stressed when like there are things that I know I need to go do, but I'm behind on doing them. For example, I hadn't created any content. I hadn't written out any scripts for myself in the last like kind of week or two. And so I could just kind of feel that, inside of me kind of like burning. I don't want to lose my momentum. I'm getting frustrated here. So kind of that stress that comes with the inaction and the regret, and then all of a sudden that can compound. Then you feel like you're missing goals, you're not making moves, and maybe you're watching others though, kind of like the example that I was giving earlier, where your friend that bought 2 or 3 years ago, you told him that you were going to wait until interest rates came down an eighth of a point more because you really wanted that 2.5%. Well, you're looking at him now, and he's got $200,000 of equity in his home. He's got a 2.5% interest rate. He took action. You didn't. And that can be frustrating, and you can have some regret from that. And, the other thing is just the loss of confidence.
Yep, you can apply that to a lot of areas in life. You see somebody that's succeeding and not seeing the underlying path that they took to get there and
Yeah.
understanding that it was a long road. All you see is the highlight reel where they're at the top of the mountain, but not realizing that it took time and effort and confidence just to, you know, do something that's maybe unnatural or at least a little bit unnerving at times, like getting into the game. So it's just important to realize that and hopefully
Yeah.
take some of this emotion out of it.
And I think where if you don't have that confidence, that's why you want to have a really strong either peer group or mentor group. Say for example, you want to buy your first investment property and you're just uneasy. You don't know how to evaluate it, or if you don't know if it's going to cash flow or if this is a good value. Find a mentor, find a real estate professional that really understands investing. And once you're around those individuals, even if you haven't taken that step and bought your first investment property, that can still just give you so much confidence knowing that you have a support group there and partner with someone. That's another great resource. Like go do a deal with someone and partner with them. What my partner is my brother. We do a lot of investing together in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we're in it together. And knowing that he's got my back, I got his back, we both bring different personal assets to the table, different skill sets, and a lot of those are very very different. I'm very literate in the financing, underwriting, equity evaluation. He's really good at just finding deals. He also is an excellent property manager. He's a handyman. He has a dump trailer business that he runs. So he has all these, you know, different tools, tractors, bobcats, dump trailers, where, if we need to have a construction project or do a fix and flip, it's like he already has all of that, and it's all set up. So we're a partnership, and we complement each other very well because our skill sets are so different.
Yeah, that is one of the biggest advantages you guys can have out there is having a good team, a good circle around you to really take away some of that stress and anxiety and also just help you guys succeed at a higher level. Really, really
Yeah.
important.
We got to get to the sponsors here. So, we got our sponsored segment. This episode is sponsored by Adam Sells Denver, because in 2025, the rules of real estate are changing fast. If you're not paying attention, you're getting left behind. Have you attended one of our monthly live and free homebuyer masterclass webinars? Sign up for the next one at webinar.adamsellsdenver.com. Let's help you stop waiting and start winning in this Denver real estate market. Thank you, Adam Sells Denver.
Well, thank you. Great sponsor. Really appreciate all the contributions you've done, Adam. Thank you.
And Adam Sells Denver has been, refresh my memory here, just about the start of the podcast, hasn't it?
Yeah, they've
Been one of
been
our sponsors?
they're one of our anchor sponsors from day one.
They've been
We're-
there since the beginning, so
They
very,
have,
very
yeah.
thankful.
Very appreciative. And Ben and I actually just got done hosting one of these free live webinars tonight. So we had a really good showing tonight and definitely covered some great tactics and tips to succeed right now in this pretty unique time we have in the Denver market. So if you guys want to hop on to the next one, make sure you guys do. Again, it's just webinar.adamsellsdenver.com. So, guys, I want to just ask any of our listeners out there, just kind of rhetorical, but also, if you have anything serious that you want to, maybe leave as a comment on if you guys are watching this video version on YouTube, drop a comment down below there. Or just shoot us a DM. But just what's one thing that you've maybe been putting off because you're waiting for the perfect time? This doesn't have to be real estate related. Maybe it's taking that trip to Europe that you've always talked about. Maybe it's getting in a little bit better shape and committing to running a half marathon this year, whatever it may be. Just share with
Starting a
us something.
podcast.
Yeah, starting a podcast is something that you've been putting off because you're waiting for the perfect time. I just want to kind of clarify that this isn't just about real estate. This can apply to any aspects of life, and it holds true just as much so with those types of goals and dreams, just as much as real estate.
Yes. Speaking of which, my girlfriend Grace, she has, up until Memorial Day, she had never even run a 10K. She's done a couple 5Ks, and she did the Boulder about a week and a half ago, which is a 10K, so 6.2 miles. And that was the furthest that she's ever run. And shortly after that, she committed herself to do her first half marathon. And so what was so intimidating and almost even sounded impossible just a couple weeks ago, well, what we did is we built out a training plan over the next 12 weeks. The half marathon is the first weekend of August. And kind of what you were saying there, it's like there wasn't a plan before. This thing seems so outrageous. She kind of had a desire to do it, but now she's a week into her training. She's been running 2 or 3 miles every day, and she started to build some of that momentum by taking action. And she feels so much more confident just a week later than she did 2 weeks ago. Now she's like excited about her training. She's looking forward to her long runs and, can't wait. Whereas 2 weeks ago, she didn't even know if she could do it.
That's awesome, man. Good for you, Grace. If you're listening or watching, proud of you.
So am I.
Well, let's wrap this episode up with just a couple key takeaways. Perfect timing is definitely a myth. And I think that's the biggest takeaway, in my opinion, tonight is just understanding that it's never going to be the most perfect opportunity. Whatever it is that you're focusing on, just realizing that getting in the game, getting some action, taking that step forward is the biggest thing you guys can do. The longer you wait, the more you risk losing, especially with real estate. That's equity, stability, momentum, all that stuff. So it's just really important to understand that, it's not just what you're gaining, but also it's the opportunity cost or what you're losing by not taking action.
Yep. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning in. We love you guys. It wouldn't be possible without you, and we'll see you next week.
Yep. You guys have a great rest of your week. And don't forget, share the show with a friend, help us grow our audience. And if you have any specific topics you'd like for us to cover, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, shoot us a message. We'd love the opportunity to connect with you. Catch you guys next time.